Hi, I'm Chris McCoy. Welcome to the Memphis Flyer podcast. Every week we tell you what's going on in Memphis and what's in the paper. And this week we have a very important cover story. In the wake of the Tyree Nichols killing, the Department of Justice started an investigation into the Memphis Police Department. It ran for 18 months, and last week they finally released their report. And at the time, the mayor and the chief of police had a press conference where they both said that they had not yet read the report, and they also rejected the idea of entering into any sort of consent agreement with the federal government to improve the Memphis Police Department. They hadn't read the report, but we did. We went in depth into the report, and we went and interviewed several people who have been involved in the multi-year project of trying to reform this police department, and people who deal with it in the day-to-day, and everybody else that we could think of who might want to talk about it. And what we found in the report, what the Department of Justice found, was really shocking. They had four main points, one of which is the department uses excessive force on a routine basis. Officers will often use force as a first line rather than attempting to de-escalate a situation. They said that particularly in regards to behavioral health, there were big problems with how responders dealt with people who were having a mental health issue, sometimes just defaulting to violence straight away with them. And there were definitely racial disparities in how laws were enforced and in who got arrested and in who was cited for things like, say, marijuana possession. Black people are cited at a much, much higher rate than white people for marijuana possession, even though statistics show that black people and white people use marijuana at about the same rate. Black people were pulled over much more frequently than white people in neighborhoods that had similar crash rates over time. There's a lot more of that sort of thing in the report and in the cover story, which I urge all of you to read either on a physical copy or to go to memphisflyer.com and check it out. There were also multiple reports in the DOJ report of really shocking incidents of violence and just neglect and a lot of other things on the part of Memphis Police Department officers. Now, the DOJ investigators went through case files. They watched videos from of surveillance videos and body camera videos, and they rode along with officers and observed them. And to me, a lot of the stuff that they observed was really shocking, because the police were willing to do this in front of fellow law enforcement officers, and because the Department of Justice now, we're talking about real. This is a policing organization, as Alex Hensley from Decarcerate Memphis said in the story. This is another policing organization. This is not Decarcerate Memphis. This is not the activists who've been trying in the wake of the Tyree Nichols killing, and well before that even, to reform the police. This is the Department of Justice saying this. And some of the incidents of violence that they saw and were just incredibly shocking to me, and to, I think, anybody with a conscience who sees this. And one of the things that really stuck with me from the DOJ report was that the CIT team, a team that is supposed to be specially trained to deal with mental health problems, are just not doing a good job, even though the entire thing is called the Memphis model. We pioneered this, training, giving police officers extra training to deal with people who are in mental health crises. But it looks like we're not doing a good job of it either. In one case, an 8-year-old kid who had 4 behavioral health diagnoses and who was on medication encountered police department MPD 8 or 9 times in 2 years. They have video of this kid being roughed up by a police officer. In one case, there was a fight at a football game, at a high school football game. And when police were breaking it up, one officer singled out a 16-year-old girl. I'm sorry, maybe she wasn't 16. She was a teenager, is what it said. And taunted her. And when the girl responded, 2 more officers grabbed the girl, threw her to the ground, and handcuffed her and led her away. And while she was just trying to leave, the area with everybody else. In another case, a 16-year-old girl, that's where I got the 16 thing from, a 16-year-old girl called police for help because she had been assaulted. Then, when police got there, the person who was calling for help ended up in handcuffs and ended up going down to the station. There was a man who was tackled and beaten for littering in a public park. And he even said, "Hey, I'll pick up my cup." And it didn't matter. It goes on and on. We detail a lot of these incidents in the story, but there's even more that are in the report. And once again, I urge everybody to read it. I know the report is 70 pages long. Our story is about 4 pages long. It's a lot easier, a lot shorter to read, and we try to hit the highlights, or rather the lowlights. So another thing that we did was ask a lot of people. We talked to a lot of different people about their reaction to this report, some of whom had read it and some of whom had not. And one of the most shocking things in the report to me as well, in the behavioral health area, was that Memphis police trainees are taught that bipolar people with bipolar disorder, cannot feel pain. Now just think about that for a second. You know anybody that's bipolar? Can they feel pain? That's what I asked Dr. Jeff Warren of the City Council, who is a doctor and should know who can feel pain and who can't feel pain. And Dr. Warren said that he had not read the report. And then when I told him about that part, he said, well, just because it's in the report doesn't mean it's true. And Dr. Warren and the mayor, their attitude is, we're not going to get involved with the Department of Justice. We're not going to enter into a consent decree with the Department of Justice. And usually when these things happen, I mean, the DOJ does not investigate every police department on the planet or in the country. If you have a DOJ report, an investigation like this is called a patterns or practices investigation, which is to determine whether or not, the Tyree Nichols killing, for example, was a one-off incident, or if it was a pattern that happens over and over again, that it is the result of policies that were set out by the chief of police and by the mayor, or if it was just rogue cops, just some bad apples. So not everybody gets this, but when they do, usually how this ends is in a consent decree. And what that means is the DOJ and the city negotiate a set of terms. These are the things that we have to change. The DOJ assigns monitors to make sure that they do change. And they are monitored over a given, span of time, 10 years, 5 years, whatever it is that they negotiate. Now, the mayor has said in his press conference that they are not going to enter into a consent decree. They believe that the steps that they are already taking to reform the police are going to be enough, and that they believe that the expenses involved in doing this and in trying to fix this problem with the DOJ would be too high for the city. And they also mentioned that in some cases, when these consent decrees were entered into, crime would go up in the cities. Now, I think it's worth pointing out at this point that the Memphis Police Department's clearance rate, which is the ratio of crimes reported to arrests made, they call it they clear the case if they make an arrest in the case, or if the alleged perpetrator is dead or whatever. That clearance rate was already low. 3 years ago, it was at 22%. That means 22% of calls that go into the MPD result in arrest. The other 78% don't. That was 3 years ago. 2 years ago, that clearance rate was 17%. Last year, that clearance rate was 13.9%. 14% of the crimes reported to the Memphis Police Department result in an arrest. The other 86% don't. Now, if they think this is acceptable, that this is an acceptable level of performance from the police department, if you think that, then that's fine. Maybe we don't need to do any more reform. But we also heard from a lot of other people. Alex Hensley from Decarcerate Memphis, Amber Sherman, who's lobbied the city council in the wake of the Tyree Nichols case repeatedly to try and get these reform measures passed. And one of those reform measures that they lobbied for is about pretextual traffic stops. Now, another thing that's in the MPD, that's in the Department of Justice report, is that these traffic stops, that basically, in order to deter and solve violent crime, the MPD conducts random traffic stops in what they deem to be high crime neighborhoods. Now, as District Attorney Steve Mulroy points out in the story, this strategy has a very, very low hit rate, something like 2 to 3% tops. 2 to 3% of the time, when they pull people over, they find somebody with a serious warrant, or they find something in the car that leads to an arrest. And that time that they're spending on this could be spent a lot better investigating crimes, for example. And a pretextual traffic stop is what led to the killing of Tyree Nichols. He was stopped by a specialty unit of the Memphis Police Department called the Scorpion Unit. And they were in an unmarked car, and they were not in uniform. And Tyree Nichols was doing nothing wrong. The chief of police herself said there was no evidence of any wrongdoing on Tyree Nichols' part. And these special officers responded with such force to nothing, to no provocation, that they killed this guy in the middle of the street, 2 blocks from his mom's house. So maybe we shouldn't be using these specialty units to put in unmarked cars to pull over people, to pull over random traffic stops. Now, there's a lot more in the story. There's a lot more in the report. We talked to a lot more people as well. We talked to the head of the local Black Lives Matter chapter. We talked to several other folks, and I encourage everybody to read this story and to think about what it means. To think about what it means to live in a community where the police are not doing their job, and apparently they believe that bipolar people can't feel pain. So, once again, check us out on memphisflyer.com. Check us out on in a physical copy. And this is going to be our last podcast for the year. We'll be back in January, bigger and better, hopefully with some better news. So, to all the people in Memphis, happy holidays. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you next year.